Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising episode. And I think this is an episode which is topical and relevant to absolutely everybody. You don't need to be in HR to be interested in this topic. I am delighted that a fellow practical inspiration author, Helen Beedham, has joined me today. And we're going to talk about, well, your new book. By the time people listen to this, it will be launched, called The Future of Time. Helen is of Helen Beedham Consulting. She's got lots of 25 years of HR, OD experience. And I'll get you to introduce, maybe perhaps give us a bit of your background, Helen, as to how you came to be here in terms of this and to focus in on this topic. And then let's explore your whole topic about time management, how we can be more effective, all those sort of things. But a fresh look on it would be marvellous to do on the podcast. So Helen, welcome to the HR Uprising podcast.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. Thank you for inviting me to join you. Really delighted to be talking with you today. Look forward to chatting about some of the topics.
So just give us, because as you know, with the HR Uprising podcast, so although this is a topic that's relevant to everybody, we have got predominantly HR, OD, L&D listeners. What your background is similar. Do you want to just give us a brief background and how you come to be focusing on this topic as well?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in retail for 2 years at Harrods, working with one of the directors there, but quickly realised retail wasn't really for me and moved into management consulting for what is now Willis Towers Watson. And I was there for 15 years as a change management specialist, leading major change programs for private and public sector organisations. Helping to do things like merger integration, transformation of HR functions, introducing new HR policies and programs. So a really strong HR element. And they were mainly
lots of employee engagement, isn't it, Towers Watson? That's always remember it. Yeah,
that's right. A lot of that as well, a lot of research side. And I specialised in organisational culture change and managing change in communications, helping people to understand what leaders are trying to signal and introduce and how to adapt to new ways of working. So I did a lot of organisational culture research, for example, and helping to implement new mission, vision and values, as well as very practical things around HR policies and programs. So I loved that. It was great fun. I had some fantastic mentors, wonderful clients. I got to travel a lot. After 15 years, I decided not to go back after my daughter was born. She's now 10. I took a 2-year career break. And then after that, I spent 6 years helping to grow the professional network called City Parents, where I became a director and led a lot of their events and client relationships with big city firms for 6 years and chaired their conferences and hosted events, etc. So that was fantastic fun and really interesting in growing a small but very successful business. And then a couple of years ago, took the step to work for myself. So my business is Helen Beedham Consulting Limited, and I'm writing, speaking, advising on creating workplaces where everyone can flourish. So looking at both the organisational lens, how you create change, how you create environments and working practices where people can bring themselves to work in a very authentic way and really progress in their careers, whatever their background or ambitions or home life is like. And looking at the individual within that system as well and how to support them within their careers. And as part of that, during lockdown, I spent all that time we were stuck at home writing my business book, having been offered a contract by Practical Inspiration Publishing, and it's my first book, so that was a whole new experience, as well as the whole new experience of COVID and of working for myself. So it's been quite a fascinating couple of years.
Absolutely, yeah. Fair play, making the most of that lockdown to do something constructive with it. So I was thinking, the topic of your book obviously is about time. It's about reworking time, transforming organisations. I was starting to surmise, was there a link to do with the fact of, I suppose, juggling time, the city parents thing? Is that what inspired you? What made you decide that this was the topic to focus in on when you've done all that stuff on culture?
Yeah, good question. So I've personally had lots of different experiences of time at work. Literally, when I was in retail, I had to clock in and clock out the very old-fashioned way, and your time cards were analysed by your manager each week. And I found myself wondering, are they looking at that to see how productive we are? How are we measuring productivity? But I never got the answers to that. And then in management consulting, your time, you generally, not always, but mostly invoice clients on the basis of the time you spend working on projects for them. So you have to account for your time. And I did that. We had to do that in 6-minute increments. So when you've accounted for your time every 6 minutes for 15 years, it's quite a hard habit to break.
You don't want to lose yourself and go and look something up like I did earlier on LinkedIn, to go and connect with somebody and realise that I'd got distracted in my stream, do you then? If you can, that's only 6 minutes that I've just lost on social media.
And they don't tend to have time codes for that kind of activity, unfortunately. You have to get a bit creative.
You can't bill that to anybody.
No, exactly. And then and I was actually one of the first people to work part-time there before my daughter was born, for reasons that weren't related to childcare or for caring responsibilities. It was really to get a different kind of work-life balance, to give me time outside of consulting to focus on some non-work things that really mattered to me. So I was a bit of a kind of test bed or trailblazer in that way. And then as a working parent, very much conscious of that whole juggle between domestic family life and work, and yes, running a professional network primarily aimed at working parents. A lot of that was about helping people progress their careers, but still manage time for family, time for themselves, time for their well-being as well. So I guess a lot of personal experience in that, but also professionally, over the years, I have conducted just enormous amounts of research and heard so many different employees talk about their experiences of time at work, that I knew that there were kind of fundamental systemic issues around this that kept cropping up time and time again. So a couple of years ago, as the idea for the book was starting in my head, I was mulling over all of these things and talking over lunch times to my husband, who I met through work, who works in a similar field, OD and leadership. And he said, I really think you're onto something. And so I kept noodling on it and talking to people and doing a bit more research. And that really led to the shaping of the idea for the book, that actually the way we think about time and we manage time systemically is quite broken. It's not working for businesses and it's not working for individuals. And there are ways we could approach it that are much, much more beneficial.
Okay, so a really fresh way of looking at time. I'm just reading the synopsis that I had here, which was about reworking time, transforming organisations by adopting 24 positive time solutions in order to build a more diverse, engaged and productive workforce. So it sounds quite practical as well, if you've got the 24 time solutions in there that you can come up with. And so I heard you talking about research there. How did you do your research for this?
Yes, so for the book specifically, I conducted over 20 interviews with people in leadership roles, heads of HR, diversity, inclusion, well-being, some academics, some authors who'd written other books on similar subjects, like Alex Sujung Kim Pang, who wrote Shorter, which is a book about moving to a 4-day working week, for example. And So a lot of first-hand research that way. I also ran a survey up front for people I knew through my network to get their experiences, which gave me lots of great examples and anecdotes to use, even if it wasn't such a huge study that it was statistically significant. But then I also did a lot of desk research and drew on a lot of published studies as well. So inputs came from lots of different ways.
Brilliant. So let's get into some practical takeaways then in terms of the sort of things that we can explore here. I mean, one of the terms I wasn't sure what that necessarily meant, which perhaps is good for us to dig into, is this concept of time blindness that you refer to. Yeah? Do you want to explain a bit about that?
Sure. So the basic premise of the book is that, as I said, the way we think about and manage time is not working well for individuals or for businesses. And this is for two reasons. Firstly, we tend to think about time management just in relation to the individual. We think about, productivity hacks or ways to work faster, smarter, and we tend to very much leave it to the individual to manage their time, even against a huge tidal wave of emails or demands from work and from outside of work as well. But we don't tend to think about the interconnection between people's time management, their time choices and their time habits. We don't tend to look at the big picture across teams and organizations around how we manage time. So that's one problem. The other problem is the culture that we have around time in the workplace. And this is really a subset of our organizational cultures generally. So we have a whole load of social norms around time that relate to the way our values, our assumptions, our beliefs, our habits and behaviors. And they're not always very conscious or even something we particularly pay attention to or talk about. So to give an example or two, some norms we have around time, and I list a few more in the book, are around busyness. We have a real cult of busyness. If we're looking busy, then we're looking important and productive, like we're cracking on with the important things. We very much emphasize the short term over the long term. There's a lot of focus on urgency and speed, 24/7 availability, being very responsive. And we have a very meetings heavy time culture as well. We also tend to be quite reactive in our time, thinking about time. Our brains are very easily drawn into paying attention to whatever distracts us or pops into our inbox. I don't know about you, but the number of times I've got up on a Monday morning and thought, right, I want to crack on with XYZ today, and I'm going to accomplish ABC. And then by mid-afternoon, I realise I've been working flat out and I've not actually started on any of those things, and yet I've been incredibly busy. We tend to get into reactive mode based on what demands are made of us during the
That's things like emails and stuff where you get sucked into your inbox, isn't it? And our attractiveness to sort of, I think just the newness, I think, is it a dopamine hit that you get from having the sort of new stuff rather than necessarily the longer term important stuff.
Yeah, that's right. It's the real battle between what's urgent and what's important. And you're right, our attention is very easily hijacked by incoming requests and demands, whether that's through our inbox or whether it might be through a call with a colleague who says, oh, I really need your help today with X. What we tend not to do is pause and think, is that something we need to be doing now? Is it something I need to be involved in? How does this link to the priorities we are focusing on? We tend to just leapfrog those conversations and get straight into action. So those are a whole load of cultural norms that we have at work, but we're not very good at paying attention to them. We just tend to plow on in the way we're used to. And that's what I call our time blindness, our lack of attention and conversation to some of these habits and social norms. And they are problematic. You might say, well, it's existed like this for years. Why is it a problem? Why is it urgent? Why are you saying we need to deal with this? Well, I do think it's a problem. It creates all sorts of organizational defects that I talk about in the book. And it also creates barriers for individuals in terms of getting in and getting on in their career, because this kind of time culture works well if you are somebody whose personal life or home life setup or career ambitions or working preferences or demographic fits, and that often means closely resembles people in the leadership positions, and you are able to work in similar ways. If for any reason that's not you, then it can become a lot harder to get in and get on in this kind of time culture. You end up having to make sacrifices that don't work for you, or you get overlooked or disadvantaged in some way. And so that's where the diversity angle comes in on it. And I can talk a little bit more about that later if that's helpful. So this is our time blindness. It causes problems for individuals in terms of having sustainable work lives, being able to access as equally as other colleagues opportunities in their career, good work opportunities. And it actually really affects our productivity, because we end up losing so many chunks of productive working time, either jumping between calls or because we're in reactive mode, and because we're not collectively talking enough about the real priorities that we need to divide our time up and spend on, because we only have so much time in a week, and how we're going to do that together. So that's hopefully explained a little bit there.
Yeah, so let me just see if I'm understanding some of this back. And I might go back to the sort of team one, because that was completely new to me. Because so some of this resonates with the Eisenhower model and what the 7 habits, Covey's sort of important, urgent. So aspects of this have been problems for a long time, and it doesn't surprise me we've not got any better at it as we've got busier. We just have more of an urgency driver in terms of that. I was interested in what you were saying there about it causing sort of organisational defects and issues with the career. So if I think about the Covey model, I suppose I might think that spending time on development to enhance my career, developing myself, or CPD, might be something that's important but not urgent, and therefore I don't do it, and that would be a detriment to my career. So I would link that myself. I don't know, but do you mean something different to that, or in addition to that?
Yeah, that's very much part of it. I guess I look at it very systemically. So I look at it in terms of how do we lead organizations? How are those organizations structured and designed to help people focus on important work, in terms of structure and processes and choice of technology and the technology we use, but also what kind of physical and virtual environments we create and how those help people make good use of their time and healthy use of their time. I also talk a lot about all the kind of people management aspects, and that relates to the deal between employer and employee that's on offer and what's expected in return, and also HR policies and programs, everything from pay and rewards, learning and development, career management, etc. So to take your example of learning and development, yes, I very much heard that through my research, people saying, learning and development is signaled as important, but actually stuff gets scheduled for the lunch break, which then says actually it's not that important. Yeah. Or it people continually
get pulled off training courses. Back in face-to-face days, something urgent would pull someone off a training course. It would always be seen as less important rather than prioritised.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've certainly experienced that. I'm sure lots of listeners have too. That's often the thing. Oh, it's only L&D. We can let that go. But it's also from a business perspective. So many CEOs are saying that they need certain skills in the future, and they're going to be relying heavily on upskilling and reskilling existing employees to have the capabilities that their business needs in the future. That L&D is this huge priority for them. But I ask the question, is that really being manifested in the culture at work? Are people seeing this prioritization of their time in learning and development? There's a bit of a gap between what they're saying and what actually the experience is around learning and development.
So what's important strategically isn't being cascaded down the organisation into how people are allowed to spend their time, or encouraged to spend the time, or being reinforced, almost the counter. So that example about being pulled off a training course. I'm interested in the people processes one as well, because I think that's an interesting one where people management activities are often not seen as important. So, I mean, I'm imagining that some of the problem is people don't know what their priorities are. And so whether it's goal setting or objective setting, that often you see in terms of HR processes, it's all about maybe appraisal is the thing that's sort of pushed, but actually that's not really helping people prioritize. That's a bit too late. It's the goal setting which is what we really need to know what's important. And in a very fast changing time, like we're and like we've had as well, where the goalposts are moving all the time, it's even more important to keep reprioritizing and know where to spend your time. That would be a perception. That's one of the things I've talked to people about over the last couple of years working remotely. Is that where you're going with that, or is it?
Yes, absolutely. At every level, really. So at the leadership level, it's agreeing their strategic time investments. Thinking about time as a strategic asset. So we only have so many hours of our employees' time in any given week or month or year. So what do we really want people to be focusing on, and how are we getting that clearly communicated? And are we checking that people really understand that? So that's at the more strategic level. And then I think accompanying that is defining what productive means. I've been amazed at the number of organizations and people I've spoken to who say, actually, we never really describe what productive means. And if you ask any one person, it'll probably be described in all sorts of different ways. And often the trap we fall into is defining it in terms of time as an input. It's X hours spent on this, or Y hours spent on that. It's not usually described in terms of the outcomes and outputs that people want to see, that demonstrate something has been successfully achieved, and the impact of those outcomes. So I talk a lot in the book about becoming much more outcome oriented as an organization. And I actually, before we get into the 24 time solutions, I talk about the 6 traits of time-focused organizations. So what's different about organizations that do value time well? And the first trait is about being very outcome obsessed, where they have a really sharp focus on outcomes, and leaders role model very time intelligent behaviors. And that goes down to team manager level as well. So at the team level, one of the things I recommend in the book is that managers are equipped and given the skills and confidence to facilitate conversations across their teams about the priorities at the team level, about how they're going to work together to do that. And that's really through some simple kind of mutual contracting, understanding individuals' preferences, but also putting that in the context of what the team is on the hook to deliver and what successful delivery looks like. But there are ways of having that conversation that leave people feeling more engaged and motivated and sharing the common sense of a shared goal. And I think those are good habits to get into as managers. So I give a few tools and examples of how to create time-savvy teams in the book, how to contract with one another. So that it's very much at the team level as well. And then, yes, at the individual level, we all have a role to play in terms of how we think about in our role, our own priorities and the things we want to achieve, but also how we want to grow and develop, and how we want to really role model certain values and behaviors to colleagues, and how we can do that. So there's a few checklists in the book. Managing or responding to all these multiple demands on my time, and I'm perhaps got caring responsibilities outside of work, or perhaps I have some health concerns, or there's something else about me that puts pressure on me time-wise. How do I manage all of that and think about creating really good, productive, healthy habits to help me be successful at work?
And that's quite holistic, isn't it? That whole person, because actually the recharging and avoiding burnout and thinking about sustainability of productivity. That was one of the things I was thinking. So you're going into the teams bit there. So maybe giving teams the skills, and it could be virtual teams now on different time zones, which is a whole extra challenge as well to weigh into this. So is that then about them defining outputs, defining ways of operating? What are the tips for something like a high performing, time productive team?
Yeah, it is about those things. I think it's firstly about creating a positive and safe environment to have the conversation in, where people feel they can say what they think and what they would like, and know that that is being heard respectfully and understood. Then it's having conversations very much about the objectives, the team's shared objectives, what good delivery, good performance looks like, how that's going to be measured, and then it's having conversations about who delivers which elements, how they're going to work together to deliver that, understanding what people's needs and preferences are around their own working time. So why one team member might really value full-time in the office and time with other colleagues. Perhaps they're trying to learn a complementary skill or grow their expertise in an area, or to network more because they are relatively new team member in some way, or maybe they have some caring responsibilities or a certain commute, and their work life, they can be much more productive with a certain working pattern. So it's very much about working hours and boundaries. I think getting explicit about contacting each other outside of formal working hours and how we define formal working hours, because that itself is shifting a lot. So what are people's preferences around non-working time? One of the things I hear a lot is that people are saying, well, I'm kind of doing a low level of work all the time. And I think this whole question of non-working time that's actually spent working, or time at the employer's disposal, is increasingly coming under scrutiny in the media, and even going through courts, as Uber, for example, found out recently. So I think that's something employers are really starting to pay close attention to, and thinking about ways in which they can encourage people to be switching off, to be setting boundaries around their working time, and not to let those boundaries just blur endlessly.
Yeah. Because I think that's one of the things that has come through the hybrid working, the whole sort of people being forced to work from home. Not everybody has learned that compartmentalization skill, right? And that's what you need to do, probably not to burn out, and need to be quite strict on it as well, because you haven't got that natural sort of get on the car or on the train and making that break. So you have to find a way to do it. Of course, the upside of that is that you can, in theory, choose to work longer days, some days, shorter days, other days, fit other things around it. But you have to be able to have that paradigm, I suppose, take that step back, and your whole concept of really being aware of how you're using your time, and what's important, not just for work, outside of work.
Exactly. And I describe it very much as building time awareness, and doing that at individual level, at team level, and at leader level. So becoming a time intelligent leader, for example. We talk about IQ, we talk about EQ, and in the book I talk about, it's called time intelligent leadership, or TQ. It's understanding my preferences as a leader around how I spend my time and what that looks like in practice, but also the impact of that on the people I lead and on my colleagues, and what signals that sends, either kind of overtly or informally, and what am I setting up by way of a culture around this, and also how I actively support and coach colleagues in managing their time, not by calling meetings and asking for evidence of what they've delivered, but saying things like, asking questions like, how can I help you free up your time? How can I help you make best use of your time? And asking those lovely open questions that invite people to say, well, actually, here's a dilemma that I'd love to share with you, or, could you steer me on X, Y, Z? And I think it's a lot of those leader behaviors and conversations that would go a long way in shifting our kind of negative time culture.
So I totally agree with the leadership piece. So in terms of, I suppose, little takeaways for our audience that we could look at? You mentioned there were 6 traits of an effective organisation, and started with being outcome obsessed as role models. I think, did you then say time-savvy teams? It'd just be useful to maybe give people a bit of a taster maybe of what those traits are, and maybe just a couple of the tips for people as individuals.
Yeah, sure. So the 6 traits that I mentioned earlier, I'll mention them briefly now and a little bit about some of the time solutions. So the 6 traits were outcome obsessed, with a laser sharp focus on outcomes, where leaders role model time intelligent behavior. The second trait is deliberately designed, so organizations that are on a permanent quest to minimize distractions and help people focus on the important work. So that's all about the structure, processes, technology. The third time trait is actively aware, and this is about fostering healthy habits and environments that help people to do their best work. That's both physical and virtual environments. The fourth time trait is career committed, and this is organizations who invest in long-term careers before and after the length of the employment contract, and who offer tailored time deals that really work for the individual and for the business. And the fifth time trait is called community cultivators, and this is all about social cohesion, valuing humanity and individuality, valuing well-being. It's really the culture piece here. And then the final one is expertly evolving, and this is about not just seeing working time as something that is fixed and then done and then ticked off and popped in the bottom drawer, but actually as an ongoing business challenge. So therefore, companies that do that well really prize continuous experimentation, learning, and stay very open-minded to adapting their ways of working. It's very much the opposite of right, we've ticked that box, we can move on. So those are the 6 traits, and then
they're long-term focus, aren't they? I can see that whole thing is it's all about thinking of the long-term, their strategies, aren't they? Sorry,
yeah,
carry
absolutely.
On. Yeah,
that's right, because it would be easy to assume that I'm really just talking here about how we manage our time day in, day out, but I'm very much talking about the long term, how we manage, over somebody's whole career, how we manage businesses over the longer term, for example. And so then I break each of those traits down and give lots of examples from different organizations, and I draw quite a lot on neuroscience. And then in 2 chapters, I explain some of the 24 time solutions. So that's really bringing those traits to life and giving examples and saying, what are the actual things you can do differently that will make a difference in your organization? And they're all in an appendix at the back. So if I pick a couple out, we've talked about a couple creating a time-savvy team, and I offer a chart of helping people do that in the book, fostering time awareness at organizational, team and individual level, nudging users into better digital choices, for example. So this is very much one, obviously looking at technology, but looking at things like, can you preset some options in your technology that make it easier for people to make healthy choices? So, if you want to click to set up a meeting, maybe there's a prompt, say, do you definitely need a meeting on this? Because we tend to default to meetings when we don't really need to. Likewise, when you're inviting people, is it clear what role they're going to play? Do they absolutely need to be part of this conversation? But also scheduling meetings. A lot of organizations have moved to just having standard preset meeting times of 25 or 50 minutes, and you can't kind of put in hour-long blocks, etc. So, there are little ways we can nudge people into making healthier choices. Other ways, for example, relate more to how people use their working time. So lots of organizations are thinking very carefully about how to signal and protect deep working time for people by, for example, having an hour each day, perhaps over the lunch hour or first thing in the morning, where they actively encourage people not to be on meetings, by having fire break weekends, so meeting free Fridays and Mondays, for example. Some organizations have gone as far as making the first week of the new year completely meeting free to help people get really clear on the work that's coming up and get off to a really productive start. So there are certain things that, organizations are doing to help people very practically make use of their time. And another thing I suggest in the book that people can do is to create a really simple toolkit. It's not rocket science, but it's maybe a list of 10 reminders that people can have close by, somewhere visual on their laptop or near their desk, about healthy habits and productive habits during the day. And those are things like batch processing emails rather than keeping your emails on all the time and nipping backwards and forwards. Using your peak energy hours for the really important or cognitively demanding work. I know that if I've got to work on something that's taxing my brain or going to take a lot of concentration, I've got to get it done first thing in the morning.
I'm the same. My head has gone exactly there. Yeah, I have to
afternoons. Yes, exactly.
This is actually we're talking about 3:45, aren't we? This is 5:45 because it's engaging two people. But if I was writing something, creating something, I have to do it first thing in the morning.
Yes.
For me. And that's not for everybody, because some people actually are better at night, aren't they? But that's my best time.
Absolutely. So knowing your peak hours really helps, and then trying to protect those as well. And other tips such as a transition time between meetings. Our brain is so busy in the background processing the information and the conversation we've just had that switching immediately onto another topic is actually really quite demanding. And somebody I spoke to and interviewed for the book who's a business leader, pointed out that can really cost us personally and professionally, because say, for example, you're leading a team or a business or a piece of work. Without that transition time, just 10 minutes to process what you've just been talking about and then prepare mentally for what you're going to be talking about. Without that, you tend to leap from one conversation to another and start it off in the wrong mode. So you might have been in a meeting where you're in real problem-solving mode, collaboratively, and everyone's throwing out solutions and ideas and brainstorming. But then you might jump straight into a conversation where perhaps it's a mentoring conversation and you're a mentor for someone, and what you really want to be in is listening, inquiry mode, but you're still functioning and running fast on problem solving mode. So you might inadvertently be still carrying over those behaviors, and by the time you've realized, it's really a bit
that is a bit of diary management, to have that awareness, isn't it? Because it's building in that time to reset. The other thing on that I think, just purely practically, if you go from one meeting to another, and I don't, let's say you need to write up quality notes, or you need to pass something on or communicate something to somebody, or send out something that you could do if you did it in that half hour after that meeting. If you did it immediately, it would take you 10 minutes. If you leave it till the end of the week, it's gone rusty. I mean, I have it when I'm talking to customers. If I do a series of demos and I'm going, hang on, who said that to me? Or training, you're not sure which conversations all merge into each other. So it is much more effective actually to do it while it's fresh, close it down, close those loose ends, and then move on to the other one. And in the meantime, reset your style or whatever's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few snippets from the book that might be useful, and there's a lot I talk about as well, specifically for HR managers and leaders, about what better ways of managing time exist in terms of resourcing. I talk a bit about time bias, so how people are inadvertently disadvantaged through resourcing processes because there are certain groups of people who don't get the same kind of access to good work opportunities or kind of projects that are going to be career enhancing, or who get over time less time with senior colleagues or people that can really act as sponsors and mentors for them. So that's a little example around resourcing,
building in,
and around how to use the performance management discussions and what companies are doing nowadays. It's quite innovative around those end of year reviews that you were mentioning at the beginning.
Making sure that you get the right stuff in, and maybe and again, it's when you do these conversations. So there's loads of things that we could talk about here, Helen, but maybe people should get your book to be able to go into more detail. But it sounds very practical as well. So you've got checklists and tool things in there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So as a reader of business books and books generally, I love books that really get into explaining, a problem and provide lots of evidence around that. So it is quite an evidence-based book, but hopefully a fairly light and enjoyable read. But it was really important to me to try and provide the answer as far as I could, or my view of the answer based on speaking with different people and doing my research. I hate it when a book has 11 chapters of the problem and a kind of very short chapter 12 on the solution. Yeah. So the second, and there are 3 parts to the book. Part 1 is what's the problem? What's wrong with our time culture? Why do we need to fix it? Part 2 is at a high level what a better ways of managing time looks like. And then part 3 is actually time to act, how to go about changing the time culture in your organization, what the strategies, the timelines, some tips and tools are for doing that. And then, yes, there's some quite comprehensive appendices with lots of tools in there, diagnostics, tools for assessing your time culture, and tools for managers, leaders and individuals to manage their time and their team's time well, to prioritize, for example, to contract with one another, for example.
Brilliant. So it's out on, well, for listeners, it will have been out a couple of weeks ago, but it's out on the 28th of February. Is that right, Helen?
That's right. The ebook launches on the 28th of February and it's out in paperback the following day on the 1st of March.
Fantastic. What a great day to kick off. So I wish you lots of luck with the launch. If people want to get hold of you, Helen, and link with you or find out more about what you do, your consulting, how do they find you?
Thank you. I've got a website, www.helenbeedham.com, which lists all my writings and speakings and talks I give, for example. I'm also on LinkedIn at Helen J. Beedham, and I'm on most social media channels, Twitter, Instagram, and I have a YouTube channel with some of my short talks and video and a podcast on there as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining the HR Uprising today, Helen. It's really good food for thought, some good refreshing ideas, and I really like the way we've gone into some really strategic areas in which HR can do it, how we can be more holistic about things, as opposed to thinking about time management as something just an individual does, thinking about it something we all share that responsibility of. I've just realised you mentioned a 4-day week, which I thought was topical. I have to save that for another day. I'm still interested in that one, but we'll leave it there for now. So thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.